bottom line is, the brain is built to fall in love. The brain is built to form a deep attachment. The brain is built to team up to rear our young. Even now, 85% of Americans will marry by their late 40s. They may divorce after a while and remarry, but the vast majority of people around the world actually just continue to fall in love.
Welcome to LOVELINK, your guide to love and sex in all forms. We're your hosts, Simone Humphrey and Sina Simon.
Our guest today is an anthropologist who studies the biology of love and attraction. She has studied underlying personality styles that illuminate mating behaviors. She is the chief scientific advisor to Match.com and has been a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute, Rutgers University, and American Museum of Natural History. Her TED Talk on why we love has over 9 million views. Welcome, Helen Fisher. We're thrilled to have you today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be with you.
So our first question is broad, but based on all of the research that you've done, what have you learned about why we fall in love?
Oh, my God. Well, let's see. This is about 40 years of work here. So why do we fall in love? Because millions of years ago, we came down out of our ancestors were forced down out of the trees. We began to stand up on 2 feet instead of 4. And women began to have to carry their babies in their arms instead of on their backs. And it's the equivalent of carrying a 20-pound bowling ball around with you for, like 4 years. And they began to need a partner to help them rear their young. I don't see how a single female could have walked over these very dangerous grasslands of ancient Africa, collected her food for herself, protected herself from enemies. She's no longer in the trees, and they began to need a partner to help them rear their babies, to help provide and protect. And indeed, I don't see how an early male, let's say 4 million years ago, could have protected a whole harem of females. And so pair bonding or monogamy evolved. It became essential for females to have a partner and suitable to males. So we evolved, I think, 2 brain systems linked with mating and reproduction. Feelings of intense romantic love to enable you to focus your mating energy on just one individual at a time, and feelings of deep attachment that enabled our early ancestors to stick with this person at least long enough to raise a single child through infancy. So actually, I think we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. First is the sex drive. That got our ancestors out looking for a whole range of partners. You can sleep with a lot of people that you're not in love with. And then these 2 other brain systems for romantic love and feelings of attachment. And these evolved, and they evolved because they were necessary for survival. I'm not suggesting, of course, that men and women were necessarily sexually faithful to each other. Monogamy does not mean fidelity, actually, not in the academic community. Mono means one, and gamy means spouse, one spouse. So we probably evolved what I call a dual human reproductive strategy, a tremendous drive to fall in love and form a pair bond and rear our children as a team, but also a tendency to philander and to divorce and to remarry, leaving us with a whole lot of conflicting drives and therefore, programs like yours that tries to sort all this out.
Can you talk a little bit about the intense romantic love that often plagues and excites people in the beginning of the relationship? Like, why does that happen from an evolutionary perspective?
My colleagues and I actually are the first in the world to put people into a brain scanner and try and figure out why people are so anxious when they've just fallen in love. And indeed they are. I mean, my colleagues and I have put over 100 people actually into a brain scanner using fMRI or functional magnetic resonance imaging. And a good many of them had just fallen madly, intensely, and happily in love. And indeed, we found activity in brain regions linked with romantic love, but we also found activity in brain regions linked with anxiety. And you are anxious in the beginning of a relationship. You think, oh, am I too fat? What did I say that for? What did he say? You don't really know what's going on. And that just drives up the dopamine system and can create real anxiety. But along with that, it creates a lot of other very positive feelings. You really, suddenly this person becomes the very center of your life. You feel elation when things are going well. Mood swings into terrible despair when things are going poorly. High energy. You can walk all night and talk till dawn. All kinds of bodily reactions, butterflies in the stomach, weak knees, dry mouth when you're talking to the person. Intense sexual feelings of sexual possession. But the main characteristics are intense motivation. You just want to win this person, and also intrusive thinking. You think over and over and over about this person. Before I put these people into the brain scanner, I would ask them, what percentage of the day and night do you actually think about this person? And they will say, I never stop thinking about her. I go to bed thinking about him. I wake up in the morning thinking about her. I never stop thinking about this person. It is an obsession. And in fact, we've now proven that it's also an addiction. Brain regions linked with addiction become activated, which in fact is an evolutionary tactic so that our ancestors and us today too could focus our mating energy on just one person at a time and start the mating process. But along with that, as you're driving up the dopamine system in the brain, you tend to get really anxious, and that's that intensity.
So it makes a lot of sense from an evolutionary perspective why that intense romantic feeling propels people together. But why doesn't that feeling last? One would think that if it were to last throughout the relationship, that it would carry over for a lifetime and that people would be romantically drawn to each other forever. And yet that feeling seems to die down.
Well, yeah, a lot of people think that it dies down, but actually we did a whole study of people they came to us. These were people in their 50s and 60s. And they said, I'm still in love with her. I'm still in love with him. And these people were married an average of 21 years. The majority of them had grown children. And they said they were still in love, not just loving their partner, but in love with their partner still after 21 years. We didn't know whether to believe them or not. I mean, most people believe you cannot remain in love. So we put them in the machine anyway, and as it turns out, the basic brain regions linked with intense romantic love became just as active among them as among new lovers. The difference was that among new lovers, they also expressed anxiety, and among long-term lovers, there was no more activity in those brain regions, and there was new activity in brain regions linked with calm and pain suppression. So you really can remain in love, not just loving, in love long term. So I wonder about that myself. And so I've talked to quite a few people about this. And I think what's going on is that early intensity is gone, but they don't talk about divorce. They still can't wait to get home for dinner. They still can overlook the negative and focus on the positive of their partner, and they're crazy about the person. But my guess is that intensity comes and goes. They suddenly go off on a vacation to Europe, and it's all novel and new, and they're just as romantic as a new formed relationship, and then probably they get home and they feel deep sense of attachment, but they get to work and see their friends. And I would guess that in long-term, really happy partnership, where people really are still in love, that the intensity has declined, and that it still returns, perhaps on a regular level, this intense feeling of romantic love. But people wonder why that early stage doesn't last forever. And from a Darwinian perspective, it's not really very adaptive. When you're madly in love with somebody, you forget to feed the dog, you forget to call your parents, you take a nooner away off of work, you don't see your friends or family, et cetera, et cetera. That's really not the way to raise children. If you're going to have a long-term happy relationship as parents, You don't want to be, running after each other around the dining room table while the kid is hungry. I mean, you got other things to do here. So bottom line is, I think that romantic love in the beginning is so intense because it really drives people to be together and make a real commitment to each other. And then in a good relationship, it can remain returning relatively regularly, but not all the time, but slows down enough so that everybody can eat, they can sleep, they can get along with their daily life. I just don't think it would be adaptive to have intense feelings of romantic love for 40 years. I think you'd be exhausted.
So in the same way that the initial stages of romantic love can lead to really intense feelings, the lust phase, the intensity of rejection that people experience can also feel really overwhelming and incredibly anxiety-provoking. And I'm curious why rejection is also such an intense emotion humans experience.
Yeah, this is very serious because, people stalk. They slip into, when they've been rejected, they can stalk. They can slip into clinical depression. They can kill themselves, or they can kill somebody else. So this is I had originally thought, gosh, this is very unadaptive. I mean, why don't we just, after we've been rejected, why don't we just move on? But, you've lost life's greatest prize, which is a mating partner. And I've put 17 people with my colleagues into a brain scanner who had just been rejected in love. And we found activity in that same brain region linked with intense feelings of romantic love. We found activity in the brain region linked with feelings of deep attachment. Just because somebody leaves you, you don't feel suddenly unattached. But we also found activity in 3 brain regions linked with craving, obsession, and addiction, and 1 brain region linked with physical pain, not only psychological pain, but physical pain. So why would the brain do this? And I think that it's because you've lost so much. You've not only perhaps lost some of your children, or certainly the dog and the cat, maybe your home. You've lost your daily habits, your daily cycle of events. You may have lost friends and neighbors and kin. You may have lost money. You may have lost an awful lot of things. But most important, you've lost a partner who you may have wanted to pass your DNA on to the next generation. And that's survival, So you've lost big. So why is it? Why can't we just move on? There seem to be 2 stages to this. The first stage of rejection is what they call the protest stage. People just fight to win the person back. They try to seduce. They try to make the other person jealous. They try to work it out. They do just about anything they can to try to win the person back. And that's adaptive. I mean, if you can change your behavior in ways that win the person back, you have regained life's greatest prize, which is a reproductive partner. So it's adaptive to be so driven and so upset about this that you can make changes to win somebody back. And then if that doesn't work, people go into the second phase of this. After the protest phase, they go into a second phase called resignation. And during that stage, they begin to give up. And it's the very beginning of assembling a storyline of what went wrong here, and eventually throwing that story out, learning what they can learn, adapting in new ways, and then finally they begin to build a new life. So I think that the intense power of rejection evolved to first, fight to win the person back, and then with all of that despair, you are signaling all the people around you that you're in trouble. It's an honest signal, so you can get help from others. And eventually, with the help of others and with time, you recover and move on. We've all been rejected at some point. Almost nobody gets out of love alive. There was one study of college kids, and they asked a lot of questions to these kids. Have you ever dumped somebody who really loved you? And have you ever been dumped by somebody who you really loved? And over 93% said yes to both. They're still in college. I mean, they've got years to go with mishaps in their love life. So, nobody gets out of love alive. One of the most powerful brain systems the human animal has ever evolved. And, of course, it evolved so that we fall in love, form a pair bond, and stay together at least long enough to raise a single child through infancy.
It's so interesting, too, because as you're talking, the parallel between love and addiction is so apt. I mean, we kind of fall in love, like there's this high. When we lose that high, it's like a withdrawal. When we get rejected, we're so desperate, we're willing to sacrifice anything to get that high back. And it's just so interesting because we could be replacing this conversation with drugs like heroin or cocaine, and it would be a very similar process.
Or some of the behavioral addictions, gambling, sex addiction, attachment addiction. I think that all three of these brain systems can be addictions. Sex drive can turn into an addiction. Feelings of intense romantic love is an addiction, and feelings of deep attachment to somebody can be an addiction. There's some people who are so attached that they can't leave somebody, even though that person is sleeping with everybody else and beating them up when they come home and drunk on the couch, et cetera, et cetera. So they're very, very powerful brain systems, feelings of intense romantic love and feelings of deep attachment. But, what's interesting about all of the addictions, and I certainly write articles about love, romantic love as an addiction. But unlike heroin addiction or gambling addiction, oddly enough, romantic addiction can actually be a positive addiction rather than a negative addiction. People can, in the beginning of a relationship, when somebody really loves you and you really love that person, and you put aside everything else in order to build a very strong partnership with that person, with which you will probably raise babies, that's a positive addiction from a reproductive perspective, of course. So unlike all of the other addictions that they appear to be only negative, I think that at times romantic love can be a positive addiction instead.
I've read somewhere that sometimes people lose their judgment when they're in love. Is that true? Like your ability to see your partner in an accurate light because you're sort of, you're blinded. You're blinded, yeah. Literally blinded by love, right? Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Absolutely, and we know what's going on in the brain. There's whole brain regions in the front of the brain, right behind your forehead in the prefrontal cortex, linked with decision-making and planning and assessing situations. And activity in that brain region goes down. So you really are looking at life through rose-colored glasses. And in fact, even among our long-term people who are madly in love, we found activity in a brain region linked with what I call positive illusions, the ability to overlook the negative and focus on the positive. There's a whole big brain region actually linked with negativity bias, looking at the negative, and activity in that brain region begins to reduce. It begins to deactivate. So no matter where you are in a relationship, at the very beginning or way down the road, if you're in a good relationship, it is entirely possible to overlook an awful lot of bad things about somebody and just focus on the good. But certainly in the beginning of a relationship, we clearly see reduced activity in brain regions linked with decision-making.
So in the beginnings of relationships, I mean, if we saw everyone in rose-colored glasses, we would be falling in love with every person that passed us on the street. So how do we choose and how do we discern between one partner over another? What draws us to each other?
Yeah. There's, of course, all kinds of cultural reasons, and I think there's also some biological reasons. Scientists often call it your love map, and as we grow up as children, we build a list of, and it's not always a very conscious list, of what we're looking for in a partner. We grow up in a certain kind of culture. We have certain, eating habits, sleeping habits, things we find funny, people who we find attractive, people who we find interesting because of our experiences. And we begin to build an unconscious list of what we're looking for in a partner. And we carry that in our head as we are, swimming through the mating stream. And I like all of that. There's all kinds of cultural reasons that we fall in love with one person rather than another. And psychologists do know that we do tend to fall in love with somebody from the same socioeconomic background, same general level of intelligence, same general level of good looks, same religious and social values. Your childhood certainly, your love map certainly plays a role. But, you can walk into a room and everybody is from your background and same level of intelligence and same level of good looks and same social and economic and reproductive goals, and you don't fall in love with all of them. So I began to think to myself, maybe there's more to this. Maybe basic body chemistry plays a role. People will say, well, we have chemistry, or we didn't have chemistry. What do they mean by that we have chemistry or didn't? So I began to look into the biology of personality. And as it turns out, humanity has, I think more than humanity, all kinds of mammals, have evolved 4 very broad styles of thinking and behaving linked with the dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen systems in the brain. And when I started looking at this, I was looking for any trait at all linked with any biological systems. And as you guys know, there's all kinds of biological systems, but most of them, keep the eyes blinking or the heart beating. They're not linked with personality traits. But these 4 brain systems, the dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen systems, are all, each one of them linked with a constellation of personality traits. So what I did is I created a questionnaire for Match.com, the internet dating site, to see to what degree you express the traits in each one of these 4 basic biological systems. And then I watched on one of Match's dating sites, chemistry.com, who was naturally drawn to whom. Who did they choose to go out on a first date with instead of just talking endlessly over the internet? And as it turns out, people who are very expressive of the traits linked with the dopamine system tend to go for people like themselves. These people are novelty-seeking, risk-taking, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic, mentally flexible men and women. People who are expressive of the traits in the serotonin system also go for people like themselves. These people tend to be traditional, conventional, follow the rules, respect authority, concrete rather than theoretical thinkers, tend to be calm, tend to be, they like schedules and plans, and they tend to be more religious. And they go for people like themselves. I think a good example in America would be Mitt Romney and his wife, Ann. The other 2 styles tend to be very drawn to their opposite. High testosterone people tend to be drawn to high estrogen people, and vice versa. And so a high testosterone person, think of Steve Jobs, would be a very good example, Albert Einstein. These people tend to be analytical, logical, direct, decisive, tough-minded, skeptical, and good at things like math or engineering or computers or mechanics or music. Music is very structural. And they're drawn to their opposite, the high estrogen type. So high estrogen type, these people, largely women, tend to be imaginative, intuitive, very contextual. They've got a long, they see everything around the issue. They're contextual, they're holistic, they're synthetic thinkers. They see way down the road. They tend to be good with people skills and verbal skills, and they tend to be compassionate and empathetic and emotionally expressive. So now, what's interesting about my questionnaire and makes it very different from any other, it's been taken by 14 million people, actually, in 40 countries.
Wow.
That's the beauty of working with big data. Now, unlike a lot of questionnaires that put you in one box or another, that's not the way the brain works. These are all systems. We are all show some of these traits in each one of these systems. Now, so for example, me, I have a new man in my life. And we're both very high dopamine. We're novelty-seeking, risk-taking, curious, creative, spontaneous, energetic people. In that way, we are alike, and we're drawn to that in each other. He's very high testosterone, and I'm very high estrogen. So in that case, also, we're very drawn to each other because these two styles are also drawn to each other. So in those ways, we're very similar. So we're different in that he is more high serotonin than I am. He's more inclined to follow the rules and respect authority, et cetera, than I am. So, and that's sort of cool. I'm getting used to it. I don't follow the rules unless they make sense to me. But he will really follow some rules and sort of respect traditions that are great. So, I mean, I've never met two people who are alike. And I've never had two people take this questionnaire the same way. I've studied this questionnaire over and over and over. And as it turns out, I did one study of 100,000 men and women. And no two people took that 56-question questionnaire, my questionnaire on personality, the same way. And I'm not surprised. And I was glad for that, actually, because, I've never met two people who I thought were alike. And I'm an identical twin. And even my twin sister and I are not exactly alike. No two people are exactly alike. So I think, just to sum up here, that there's all kinds of cultural things that drive us to one person rather than another, but there's also some biological things, too. When people say we have chemistry, it's actually true.
So, Helen, can I ask you, it sounds like you're in the love-lust phase right now, just having started a new relationship. And I'm curious what it's like for you being an expert on love and also in a new relationship.
Well, it's I'm just like everybody else. The image I use is that of a piece of chocolate cake. You can be a cook and you can know every single thing about the ingredients of a piece of chocolate cake, but then you sit down and have that cake and you feel the same ecstasy or joy that anybody else would. So, even though I know a great deal about love, I still feel exactly the way anybody else would. You can know a lot about guns, but you can feel fear when one's pointed at you, So in the same way, you can know a lot about love. But it really, what I've known, and of course all my books, I do use my understanding of love. There's certain things that I try not to do because it won't work. Now, for example, there's times when my man wants to be alone, and he's a writer, he's a well-known writer, and he needs that time to himself and all, and I know that he needs it. And I know that I'm not going to bother him. I'd like to call, I'd like to write, I'd like to drop in, but I don't do it because. So in other words, there's various things that I've learned, some very valuable things on how to conduct a relationship from all of my studies. But in terms of my feelings, they're just like everybody else.
Did you ask him to fill out the survey?
I did. You bet. Everybody's my guinea pig.
You have a secret weapon.
Yeah, it wasn't so secret. I want to actually go back and show you a little bit about what I've learned, tell you a little bit about what I've learned about the brain and how to use what I've learned about love. Is that okay?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Well, it came from our study of long-term lovers. And before we put anybody in a brain scanner, we give them a lot of questionnaires. And one of the questionnaires was on marital satisfaction. These were our long-term lovers. These were people who were married an average of 21 years. And we found 3 brain regions that become very active when you're in a long-term, very happy relationship. Now, psychologists will tell you all kinds of things about what makes a happy partnership. Active listening, don't threaten divorce, don't express contempt, and a whole lot of other things. They're all good. I've got no problems with any of them. But this is what the brain says. This is what I want to add to that discussion, what the brain says, what's happening in the brain when you're happily in love. And it's 3 brain regions become active. A brain region linked with empathy, a brain region linked with controlling your own stress and your own emotions, and a brain region linked with, as I mentioned, positive illusions, the ability to overlook what you don't like about somebody and focus on what you do. So in my personal life, I really try to practice with my sweetheart now and with others in the past, empathy, controlling my own stress and my own emotions, and overlooking the negative. Those are very important. And the other things that I do is I try to keep all 3 of these basic brain systems alive. I keep the sex drive alive by having sex. That's the way to do it. And it's very good for the body and for the mind. And I like having sex with them, so it's not a problem. In terms of romantic love, I try to do novel things together. Novelty, novelty, novelty drives up the dopamine system in the brain and can sustain feelings of intense romantic love. And third, I really try to keep those feelings of attachment alive. I try to, any kind of good touch drives up the oxytocin system in the brain. So I like to walk down the street holding hands. I like to maybe hold hands a little at dinner. I like to kiss the person all the time. I am opposed to watching television in 2 armchairs. It'd be so much better if you sat together on the couch. Learn to at least start the night out sleeping in each other's arms. Everything that can juice up the oxytocin system and keep that feeling of attachment alive. So the last thing that I try to do is, I don't try, it's very easy for me to say very nice things to my partner, because there was a wonderful article recently that reported that if you say nice things to somebody, that you mean, of course, it reduces their cortisol, the stress hormone, reduces their cholesterol, helps with a heart rate, and boosts the immune system, not only in them, but in you also. So these are the 7 things that I do. Empathy, controlling my own stress and my own emotions, overlooking the negative, focusing on the positive, having sex absolutely regularly, doing novel things together, staying in physical touch, and saying nice things. Those are all things that the brain says are produced, when you have a happy.
And it sounds, these are all wonderful pieces of advice, and it also sounds like they're all very interconnected too. Mm-hmm. Once you're doing one, if you're taking care of your own stress, if you're using self-care, you're more likely to be more empathic. If you're more empathic, you're more likely to say nice things, and the more you say nice things, they're likely to reciprocate. It just seems like a cycle that feeds back into itself.
That's a beautiful thing to say. Nobody's ever said that, but it's absolutely true. I think you're absolutely onto something. Yep, I agree with you.
I also think these 7 strategies or 7 things to keep in mind when you're in a relationship, especially in the beginning, are really helpful to hold in mind, because when you feel some of that anxiety, you can lose sight of what's important to do, because maybe there's a fear of rejection or a fear of reaching for the other or saying something positive if you're not feeling like that's being reciprocated right. immediately. So important things to hold in mind.
It's so interesting. I've got a wonderful little handler down at Match.com. We've been working together for 11 years, and she's got a wonderful husband. And the three of us went out to dinner recently, and I don't know, we got into talking about positive illusions, and her husband says, yeah, when I get really irritated at things around the house, I go up into the upstairs bathroom, stand in front of the big mirror, put my elbows out, flap them up and down, and say to myself over and over, positive illusions, positive illusions, positive illusions.
That's great.
And isn't that
they have
cute?
a happy marriage?
Yes, they do. They've got a very happy marriage. It's a charming marriage. And a little kid now, too, and everything. But, yeah, I mean, and the brain will do that. I mean, even though you're not feeling very good about somebody, you put a smile on your face, you say nice things, the person smiles back, you get past it, and you're building this solid frame. And that's really important. I mean, people in long-term happy marriages, they live longer and they live more healthy lives.
I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about online dating, since
Sure.
you're an expert in online dating. So to me, online dating can feel so unnatural because the initial point of contact is an electronic device, whether it's the computer or your phone.
Mm-hmm.
But you've actually talked about it being a natural process, more natural than, meeting somebody at a bar or a coffee shop or, some person off the street, essentially.
I don't think it makes any difference where you meet somebody. I've never heard anybody break up who said, we broke up because we met on the internet, or we broke up because we met in a coffee house. They break up because somebody's terribly rude, somebody's unfaithful, somebody's lazy, somebody's dictatorial. People don't break up because of where they met. It doesn't matter where you met. It just doesn't matter. And as a matter of fact, these really are not dating sites. They're introducing sites. What they're enabling you to do is just meet a host of people. And in this day and age, that's important. And the reason it's important is because we're not marrying the boy we went out with in high school. We're not marrying the girl we met in college. We're not even marrying in our early 20s. And then if we do marry in our late 20s, a lot of people divorce in their 30s and they're out there again. They're not going to, after a while, you just can't stand in a bar and hope the perfect boy walks in. Or for that matter, the perfect boy walking into a coffee shop. And so basically, in our modern world where we travel a great deal, and where we're marrying a great deal later, and we have this long courtship period in our 20s before we wed, what dating services are really doing is just enabling you to meet more people. But how you meet, I don't think makes any difference at all. But maybe, but there are some advantages to it. And the advantages are that you already know some things about the person. Guy walks into a bar, you don't know whether he's married. You don't know whether he's looking for love or whether he's looking for a one-night stand. People on the paid dating sites, like Match, are we do a lot of questionnaires of we study them all the time, and over 90%, way over 90%, are looking for a relationship, and that's a good start. Meeting people who really are looking for a good relationship. You also know a few things about them, where they live, how far they are from you, what their interests are, even where they went to school, whether they like pets. I mean, you're not going to know everything. The only real algorithm is your own brain. That's the only real perfect algorithm is your own brain. So myself at Match.com and at these other dating sites, we can give you people who you say you're looking for. We can give you the right age, the right background, who lives within 20 miles of you or 50 miles of you, whatever. But you've got to get out and meet that person. And that is the big, there's some great assets to online dating. But the problem is that people don't get out and meet the person. And you've got to do that. You've got to do the job yourself. We can give you a host of people. We can introduce you to people of all varieties, but you've got to do the selecting. And this is one of the reasons that one of the things that I say is, when you first meet somebody, you know so little about them that you can just focus on the fact that you just don't like their shoes. and you think there's so many other people out there that you just say, I'll get somebody with a different color of shoes. We get too picky. On the grasslands of Africa, people couldn't be that picky because they didn't run into a million people during the course of their lives. So one of the things that I say is, if you like the person at all on the first date, get to know them better, because all the data seem to show that the more you get to know somebody, the more you like them, and the more you think that they are like you. And another thing that I say is, after you've met 9 people, stop and get to know at least one of them better, because there seems to be a sweet spot in the brain, and after you feel as if you're so deluged, you can't remember who has said what and what they did or who they are, what their name is, and you begin to choose none. So the sweet spot is between 5 and 9 to make an appropriate decision. So get out and meet the people. If you like them at all, go on a second date, get to know them better. And after you've met 9 people, stop. At least then stop and get to know one person better.
So aside from the filters that you mentioned, like location, age, some of the basics, I mean, how are people selecting from the huge kind of numbers and mass quantities of people that are on these sites, aside from, I mean, what just is so apparent, which is just people's looks?
Yeah. Looks count. You're going to have to look at them for 15 years. Looks count. I mean, all through the dating process, there are breaking points and escalation points. And right off the bat, too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too old, too young, too pink, too green, they're out. And we have all kinds of filters like that. And people grumble about those filters on the internet, but we're using the same filters when you walk into a bar. It's no different. And then, of course, you find out that he loves to play tennis, and so do you. And he's a great skier, and so do you. And he loves to read poetry, and so do you. And he's traveled all over the world, and so have you. And you both want children, et cetera. You can learn a lot about somebody pretty rapidly. But, of course, it takes years to really get to know somebody. But it's enough to get you through each breaking point. So, sure, first thing you do is you look at them. They're in, they're out. Then you email with them, or you talk to them in the bar, whichever. And they say stupid things that you don't like, or they seem to be prejudiced that you don't like, or they have the same political views that you have, etc. And so you are constantly, slowly testing the waters here to see if this person could be a good partner.
Do you have any suggestions for how people can optimize their chances of finding a match online?
Just do it.
Just do
it. They are there. Yeah. Just do it. Just do it. And if you can't do it during the day, get into your pajamas at midnight and do it. Just do it. They are out there. It's very interesting because we do a lot of studies, annual studies. One of our studies is called Singles in America. We do not poll the matched population. It's a representative sample of Americans based on the U.S. Census, and we're working on that right now. And it's a national study. And we ask a lot of questions, but one of the questions we always ask is, where did you meet your last first date? And this past year, 40% of singles said they met that person on some sort of online dating service, whereas only 25% met somebody through a friend, and something like between 6 and 8% met somebody in a bar or in a religious setting or in the grocery store. So it does seem to be becoming one of the, certainly a primary reason, a primary mechanism for meeting people, which makes a lot of sense because, as people get older, as I mentioned, they're not going to stand in a bar all night and hope the perfect boy walks in or girl. And so these dating sites are introducing sites that enable you to meet a lot of people. But you've got to do the work. And it is work. Anybody who says it isn't work I don't know, they don't come from my perspective, that's for sure, because it is. You got to get on the site, you've got to work the site, you've got to respond, and you've got to make dates, and you got to get out and meet the person. And that takes time, it takes energy. The one thing I always say is don't go out on a first date to a long dinner. Do it in the afternoon at a coffee house or in the park or at a museum, or so, and make a definite end to it. Make it 20 minutes, make it 40 minutes. Even if you're crazy about the person, don't keep it short so that you don't burn yourself out. I'll take that back. If you're really crazy about somebody, of course, hang in there with it. I mean, you don't want to throw away a chance at love.
Or you could frame it as a 20-minute date with the possibility of extending that time if things go well.
Exactly. And in fact, you can even look at your email thing and say, oh my goodness, I've got a little bit more time. Do you want to go take a walk? Or, I don't know. Love finds a way. If two people fall for each other right off the bat. And by the way, the vast majority of people don't even expect to feel love at first sight. American singles, over 50% of men have fallen in love at first sight. About 40% of women have had the experience of falling in love at first sight. But most singles, and I really like this data, do not expect to fall in love at first meeting or even the second meeting. I like that because, you can fall in love with somebody at any time in a relationship. In fact, with me, I had a friend he was just a friend. I just thought he was a pest. He just kept on trying and trying and trying. And about 2 years into this, of hanging around with them now and then, I fell in love with him. And I remained in love with him. Is this who you're with now? No, that's somebody else. Okay. Yeah. I fell in love with him and remained in love with him for about 18 years. And we broke up about 4 years ago. So don't give up on love. Cupid's got his ways. Yeah. Absolutely.
So do you find that, in your research and asking questions to the general public about their dating experiences, I'm wondering, this courtship phase seems to have changed because with online dating, people are dating multiple people at the same time, and there's lots of choice, and it can really feel like hard work, and it can take time and maybe longer than it used to before online dating.
You've really got something there, and it's my newest hypothesis, and I call it slow love. I think it's a great step forward. Marriage used to be the beginning of a relationship. Now it's the finale. What we're really seeing is an extension of what I call the pre-commitment stage, or I call it commitment light, L-I-T-E, commitment light. And what we're seeing is this long, extended pre-commitment stage. So you might go to bed with the person right off the bat. That's probably like a sex interview or etc. But it moves from like a one-night stand, into friends with benefits. You don't tell your parents and other people, and then that begins to work out more. And so you begin to go out socially together, maybe even in a group, and then you begin to move in and spend more time living together. And now these days, it's like living. It's like being together, living apart. They're keeping the younger people are keeping their own, their own houses and not even moving in completely together. So there's this very long, slow pre-commitment stage to relationships, and I really like that because it gives you time to get to know somebody, and thus bad relationships can end before you tie the knot and before you raise children. And because of that, I began to think, wow, this whole new thing about slow love, this long, extended pre-commitment stage, maybe that gives people enough time to get rid of bad relationships in order to make better ones. So maybe by the time you walk down the aisle, you know who you got, you want who you got, and you think you can keep who you've got. And so I thought, well, maybe we're going to see a coming era of more happy long-term relationships because they've shopped around. They know what they got. They know they want what they've got. So I did a study with Match of 1,100 married people. Now, not on Match, of course, regular married people. And I asked I asked a lot of questions, but one of my questions was, would you remarry the person that you're currently married to? And 81% said yes.
Wow.
So it's entirely possible with this long pre-commitment stage and slow love. I mean, fast sex, definitely, but slow love and slow attachment. I think we might be moving towards happier long-term marriages.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if the divorce rate goes down over time.
Yeah, it's been stable for quite a while now. It peaked in 1981. It's not a 50% divorce rate. That just gets bandied about from one generation to the next. It's generally between the 43 and 46%. It's still high. I mean, I'm not for divorce, but if it's a perfectly horrible relationship, it's better to divorce. And in fact, I saw some new data that, Americans have always felt, well, stay together for the children no matter what. That's changing. 67% of, when they did a poll of just regular Americans, Americans are coming to believe that it's probably worse for children to remain in a really bad marriage. And so even that is beginning to materialize into something that is could be better. If we could get rid of the bad marriages, both partners can go on to make smarter, better marriages and probably a healthier environment for their young.
So I certainly hope you're right that the slow dating movement leads to kind of more satisfying long-term relationships. But just to play devil's advocate, I'm wondering if it's possible that this slow dating movement may also lead to kind of feelings of uncommitment, and that actually more people just end up perpetually dating for their lifetime and maybe going through just serial relationships and never quite wanting to settle down.
I think there's always been people like that. But the bottom line is, the brain is built to fall in love. The brain is built to form a deep attachment. The brain is built to team up to rear our young. Even now, 85% of Americans will marry by their late 40s. They may divorce after a while and remarry, but the vast majority of people around the world actually just continue to fall in love and form pair bonds. I recently heard, it was very interesting, in the Nordic countries where it's been long popular to just live with somebody and not marry, that the newest swing is back to marrying them. Marriage is like a bamboo tree. It just sways in the wind. Beliefs come and beliefs go, and trends come and trends go, and it just snaps back up. We are a pair bonding animal, and whether we marry the person or whether we move in and form a long-term relationship, whatever you want to call it, it will continue. It's very interesting, this whole new discussion of polyamory. And everybody's talking about polyamory, which is many loves and being transparent. Actually, I admire these people for being transparent about it. But the vast majority of them are young. They're not ready to settle down. They're putting career above family as opposed to family above career for women. And they're trying everything out. But the vast majority of these people will settle down in a pair bond, most likely a sexually faithful relationship. When I asked people in the Singles in America study how they felt about polyamory, 67% of them, 67%, a little over 65%, said that they approved of it. They had no problem with polyamory. And then when I asked how many of you have done it, and only 6% had. And in fact, we wrote an academic paper on it, Justin Garcia at the Kinsey Institute, myself and several others. And we're not the first to find that. 10, 15 years ago, they were also saying that about 5.5% of singles had some polyamory, tried polyamory. So that's, the press is always talking about all these other ways of forming relationships and having sex, and they're all there. But when the chips are down, the human brain wins, and we fall in love and form a pair bond with somebody. Not to suggest we're always sexually faithful to them, but we form pair bonds. We're a pair bonded animal.
So you've done so much interesting research on love and romance, and it's been fascinating listening to you now. I'm curious, what are you interested in now, and what's next for you?
I'm really addicted to this personality material. I think that it can be very useful in understanding personality style, not only in love, but also in business. So I'm making more and more business speeches about innovation. Not everybody innovates in the same way. Different personality styles are going to have different forms of innovation. They're going to tackle different kinds of innovation, and they're going to proceed to innovate differently. Different people are going to be different kinds of leaders because they have different personality styles. And so I've created a new company called NeuroColor, and it's a company in which I created a second-generation questionnaire to measure these four broad personality styles. And I'm also interested in trying to tell the world about extroversion and introversion. I don't believe anybody measures that correctly, and I'll be happy to tell you why. I want to get farther into the biology of personality. I mean, a good 40 to 60% of who you are is cultural, has a lot to do with how you grow up. And you guys are going to be in the business of understanding people's cultural background and the problems that their childhood produced for them. But there's a second half of personality called your biology. And a good 40 to 60% of who you are is biologically based. And one thing that I would really like people to understand is not all problems in a relationship are because of your childhood. Some people are naturally stubborn. Some people are naturally risk takers. Some people are naturally penny pinchers. Some people are naturally skeptical. And instead of blaming everything on your parents, which I'm getting sick of, I know I'm saying this, I'm not speaking to the choir here. I'm speaking to people, but you're the young generation, and maybe your group can come to see that it's not just your childhood that makes for personality, but there's a great deal of biology. And the more we understand people's basic personality, the more we can reach them. I just had an article in the Harvard Business Review, and in the article, I ended up saying, when you understand the brain, you can reach anyone. And I believe that. Now, for example, my new man, he's higher on the serotonin system. We are absolutely compatible in the dopamine system and the estrogen and testosterone systems. It just works beautifully. He's higher on the serotonin system than I am. So one time recently we were going to the movies. And I said to him, sweetie, do you have a bottle of water in your backpack? And he said, yeah. I said, oh, great, we can drink it in the movies. And he said, no, we can't. You can't bring food and drink into a movie house. You got to buy it at the concession stand. Holy smokes, I said to myself, what's going on? But it wasn't about me. It was about who he is. It wasn't about his childhood. It's who he's higher on the serotonin system. He's going to follow those rules. And rather than have a royal battle over it and say, this is stupid, let's go drink the water, I recognize that's part of who he is. And once you recognize that people, in some respects, people can change dramatically, but in some, they're not going to change. You got to find a workaround. You got to operate under positive illusions, or you got to begin to respect that person for who they really are. And I just want to bring to modern psychology a fresh look at personality, a fresh look at relationships, bringing in this second half, introducing this second aspect of a partnership, which is the biology of who you are.
Is there anything else? Is there any other piece of advice that you think would be helpful for our listeners out there on love and relationships or on online dating?
Just get out there. If you're single, you got nobody to be mad at but yourself. You got to get out there. That he is out there, she is out there, but you have to find her. They cannot find you if you're sitting at home watching TV. You've got to get onto the internet or go out and meet new people. It's all possible. That's for singles. For married people, well, I'd love it if they read my books. I'd love it if they read more about personality, so that they could learn more about themselves and learn a lot about their partner that is going unused almost.
That's great advice.
Which book are you referring to?
Well, my most recent book is Anatomy of Love, second edition. That came out this past year. Why We Love is another book, and Why Him, Why Her talks more about personality styles. Just go to my website, helenfisher.com, and you'll find them all.
And we'll put the links up on our website, too, so our listeners can find your books.
Oh, great. And the other thing, the other website is www.theanatomyoflove.com. And in that, I do a lot of videos with my brain scanning partner and explain a lot of this stuff also.
Thank you so much for talking to us today, Helen. This has been
Absolutely.
illuminating and really helpful on a personal level, too.
Great.
Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and thanks for listening. We also want to thank Point in Passing for their original music for our podcast and website design. Be sure to subscribe to LoveLink on iTunes and leave us a review. See you next time.
Mm-hmm.